All right, what's going on, fellas? Those of you who've been following the channel for a little bit might have already seen a little bit ago, I posted a video titled How to Get Big Old Shoulders, where I kind of detailed my general philosophies for maximally hypertrophying the deltoids. I went through front, lateral, rear heads, my general prescriptions for how to grow them. That being said, those of you who are familiar with me might know that I'm a little bit more of a strength-oriented guy than I am hypertrophy. I have never trained for bodybuilding. It's not really my focus. And conceptually, I've always liked this idea that my physique is a byproduct of the training I do for my strength-related goals. So even if it's not a great physique, because I don't have a great physique by any means, I do like the idea that it's a reflection of what I've done to get stronger, right? And, by all means, not only is hypertrophy a byproduct of getting stronger, it's also a means of getting stronger. So rather than talk about how to maximally hypertrophy the delts, while I do have plenty of theories about that, we're going to get into my bread and butter, which is a little bit more the strength training side of things. I'm going to tell you my favorite shoulder exercises. So a little bit different than the more generalized approach of talking about what I believe to be optimal. So first and foremost, obviously, I generally gauge my shoulder strength via the strict overhead press in some form, whether that's seated or standing. That's kind of my proxy to measure general shoulder strength. So obviously that's my favorite. That's the motion that I view as my display of shoulder strength, that or maybe a log press. So that would be my number one. And I'm sure you guys all saw that coming, and that's not what you're here for. I'm sure most of you clicked with looking for accessories in mind, right? Auxiliary motions in mind, and that's what I'm going to give you. We're going to kind of go to that tertiary slot, because when I'm looking at my shoulder training, I have my primary means of training my overhead press, which is however I quantify shoulder strength, being a strict press on a barbell right now in my training. Then we have like secondary variations where we're still training in that vertical pressing pattern, but we're shifting the emphasis of the motion. This could be a behind the neck press. This could be a behind the neck Smith press, press against bands. There's a lot of exercises that I might fit into these secondary exercise slot. That can be saved for another day. We're going into the tertiary stuff. The motions that I've done to help progress my overhead press that have also led to getting reasonably large shoulders in the process. And I guess hypertrophy is kind of a goal of these, because that's primarily how we're going to be setting ourselves up for future success in the overhead press. You're going to notice that all of these shoulder exercises double as upper back exercises to some degree, because it's not only important to have strong shoulders, but you need to have the upper back strength to match if we're going to manifest that strength into a meaningful overhead press. So my number one slot, kind of an either or, I'll try to include little videos in here if I can figure that out, would be a Powell raise or a cross-body cable rear delt fly. Just take the rear delt through a pretty sizable range of motion. We're still getting some good rear trap training there. Just hypertrophying the other side of our shoulder will generally help people have a lot more stability in their overhead press. That would be my number one. It's one of those two, because unlike most traditional rear delt flies, A, we get a good resistance curve across the full range of motion on both of these exercises, and B, they're easy to progress. We get to take our shoulder to a full stretch position, which we miss in many rear delt exercises. So that would be the first one I would put out there. The second one I would put out there, this is the king for me in terms of not just front delt hypertrophy, not just lateral delt hypertrophy, not just rear delt hypertrophy, but upper and rear and maybe even some lower trap development. All of the keys to a big overhead press would be incline IYT raises. If you're not familiar, again, I'm going to try to add a video. We'll see if that happens, because those develop not only the full shoulder and the full deltoid muscle, but we're also attacking the upper back for a wide variety of functions, and that not only yields some like aesthetically pleasing hypertrophy of the upper back and the shoulders, but at the same time it also very quickly helps us develop a strong overhead position to where we don't feel like we're always pressing it out in front of ourselves. We are able to shift that, so we're not holding it in our arms and shoulders anymore, we're holding it with our upper back. So those are good by all means. The other one I kind of like to interchange with this one would be a standing shoulder giant set of full range of motion front raises to the overhead position, lateral raises to the overhead position, also known as new raises, and then some bent over rear delt flies. That giant set I also like quite a bit. Very similar kind of training both the upper back as well as the shoulders. So that would be my number 2 slot. My number 3 slot would be pretty easy. That's just going to be face pulls. We are getting a little bit of work for the lateral head, a little bit of work for the rear delt, a good bit of work for the upper back and traps, and then we are also challenging the external rotation of the shoulder. Because both your pec and your lat act as internal rotators of the shoulder, we usually get this large discrepancy in strength between internal and external rotation development. Not that the strength should be 1-to-1 necessarily, but we usually find that there's going to be a pretty sizable discrepancy there, and lots of people find that just including something to even that out a little bit of external rotation work greatly helps them keep their shoulders healthy. So we're kind of checking off that external rotation function, which is going to help us keep our rotator cuffs healthy, which is going to let us push more volume on what we actually want to be good at, which is the overhead press. So that's going to be awesome, as well as hypertrophying all of these muscles that we've established are very relevant. And then the last one that I really like is going to be a bilateral cable rear delt fly. Just as much as it is for my rear delts, I would say that the biggest thing it's helped me with is my positioning of my scaps on my overhead press. Just hammering a bunch of volume on what is a very easy to recover motion has been a godsend for me, and I just like them a lot, to be honest with you. So that would be my top 4. I don't think that I would say that if you did these 4, I don't think you're missing anything. Lots of people would love to throw a trap 3 raise in here, which is kind of a lower trap exercise. Again, this can be helpful for achieving a good overhead position. Lots of people would put loo raises by themselves in here, and I think that's a reasonable pick. I even think that the inclusion of any traditional rear delt exercise can fit in here wonderfully, but even lateral raises, right? Whether we do the straight out to the side lateral raise, or a lot of people nowadays will pitch doing lateral raises in a little bit more of the frontal plane, following the motion of the scapula a little bit better. They're a great motion. They're going to tax your trap to some degree, which is relevant to your overhead. That's not a problem. That's not something, when we're looking at them from a strength training perspective, we're not trying to isolate the lateral delt necessarily. The trap is also important for our overhead press. We're also going to challenge our rotator cuffs. Basically, anything where we are moving the shoulder joint is challenging the rotator cuffs to some degree. So this idea that we always need specific rotator cuff work in the absence of an injury or a history of injuries, not necessarily. If we're doing a good amount of pushing and pulling volume, and then we're doing some laterals and some rear delts, we're challenging the rotator cuffs in their function across a wide variety of planes of motion. They're going to be fine. And I don't think that you'd be remiss to include lateral raises in there. I think they're probably better from a how your shoulders look perspective. But that being said, I think that they maybe leave a little bit to be desired when compared to these earlier exercises in terms of setting you up for overhead strength perspective. Not to say they don't work. I absolutely include those in some people's programs, especially if having the shoulders look a certain way is their goal. But that being said, just hammering overhead press and these exercises I have detailed has yielded me a ton of shoulder growth. Is it optimal? No, but just because something is optimal doesn't mean it can't yield very good results. If you're training hard, you're eating your food, you're getting your sleep. So hope you guys liked the video. We'll see if I can edit in some little clips